hit refresh. It says, "The quest to rediscover Microsoft's soul and imagine a better future for everyone," by Satya Nadella, the Microsoft CEO. So I'm going to have to think of a question during the talk to ask you all. Best answer gets a book. Yeah. So yeah, be on the lookout for that question. Okay, so I'll say a little bit about me, but that's not really important at all. I'm a consultant. I work in London. I actually write code for a living, so I am a developer. But I'm also Irish, and the Irish are a nation of storytellers, so I love to kind of talk about stuff around code, and that's what I'm here to do today. I'm a member of the European software craft community, so mentoring is a big deal to software craft. So if this is something that's of interest to you, then you should definitely look for your local software craft meetup. And at the moment, I work for a coding bootcamp, so I help people who are learning to code, career changers, people who haven't gone the traditional route of CompSci. And this is actually going to be one of my last talks on the topic of mentoring and diversity, because I was at a conference talk. I gave a talk a few months ago, and somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, you're that diversity guy." And I really don't want to be typecast, so I think from now on I'm going to be doing technical talks. So this is the peak for me. You'll see me here next year doing ClojureScript or something. So yeah, I think for me, code got very samey, and this is maybe a route that a lot of people notice, is at some point, the act of writing code, there's not much to learn, or that's not what interests you on your learning path. For me, I got very interested in people, and I think that's one of the harder things we can even try to grasp in our work. So that's what this talk is about, and I think it's as I said, I think it's a very typical route. So hopefully some of you in the room will recognize the kind of stuff I'm going to talk about, stuff you've experienced in the workplace, and maybe if you are all about the code, then you'll be able to pick up on some ideas that you can run with and start exploring yourself. So you probably all have an experience with a mentor. You know what? You can probably think of somebody in your life who was a good mentor for you. And if I think about my career, my very first job, I had a mentor. And this is over a decade ago. And the one thing I remember about him was that he worked so slowly. And I couldn't understand how he was a successful programmer. He was a great programmer. In fact, he was probably one of the best programmers in the company. And I could never figure it out because he just produced code at such a slow rate. And there was me rushing away, straight out of uni. And I thought it was all about, number of lines of code. And so if I look back at that time, I can completely see his point of view. And it's been a journey getting there, but I would consider myself a slow programmer today, kind of proud of that. And that's one of the things I'll talk about. So first of all, the industry norm. Oh, by the way, you're going to have to suffer my drawings. They're really terrible. So at least they should provide a laugh. I've got here somebody, and I think this is quite common. A lot of companies I go into, and I'll see this kind of setup where everybody has surrounded themselves with screens. It's a competition who can get the biggest screens, the most screens. And I always think that this is crazy. I'm actually working off an iPad today. This is my main computer. I'm on a quest to have the smallest screen. I don't know why that is, but one thing I think this is an indication of is that people like to work alone. They really don't want to be part of a team. Even to speak to the person sitting on the desk next to you, you have to kind of get up, and you can't see them because of your screens. And I just think this is, it's not good, and it's just this idea of solo work, producing the best work by ourselves, is quite an antiquated idea. We know there's better ways of working, and yet we still have all of these little things, like having the most monitors, that stop us from effectively working as a team.
I think it's coming from the movies. All the movies that you watched, all the good programmers had like
Yes, the comment is, yeah, it's coming from the movies, and yeah, you're right, yeah. Because this is the stereotype, this is the Hollywood stereotype of what a geek is and what a programmer is. Yeah, and I think this idea starts when we were hobbyist bedroom coders as kids, and this is still the biggest route into programming and code. You started as a kid, playing on your home computer by yourself, and then that's perpetuated at university when you go into college and uni, and it's all about assessments and being judged for the work you've done. There's very little team effort, and that is changing, but it's still the biggest component of the work we do at uni. And so it's only normal that at work we just do the same thing. It's just what we're used to. You don't think about whether it's the most effective way of working. And I think, in the old days, when we had waterfall, actually my first job I started as an engineering test, which was in the waterfall method, the kind of thing of saying, oh no, you're not good enough yet to work on the real code base. You have to write tests, first of all, and then you can progress to the maintenance team, and then you can finally be a developer after doing your years of penance in those teams. And actually for me it was great, because I learned all about quality and why it's important to build quality software, and now I'm a big TDD advocate, which I'm going to talk about actually. But if we compare that to the agile world today, the way we work hasn't really changed. We're still very much solo, and I think it's people often talk about waterfall as kind of a bad thing, but when we come to look at planning later, we'll see that there's some ideas of planning which, people know how to plan well 3 or 4 decades ago. There's still good and bad planning today, so we'll look at that in detail. Another thing from my first job was the idea of sacred code, and this is still, again, industry norm. I joined the first company I joined, I remember looking at the code and thinking, I can't touch that code because somebody else wrote it. It's not mine to touch. Instead, I have to write my own classes and add to the system. I can't possibly, that code is just not touchable. And that is, the same idea exists today. We build software systems in a way where they always get larger. And we don't really teach the value of changing code or deleting code. And a lot of junior programmers today, this is definitely after my time, but Stack Overflow driven development. A lot of development is done by just getting on Stack Overflow and looking up an answer and then pasting in the code. And people don't even think to say, hey, Stack Overflow is not the best place to learn to write code. So there's a very specific thing about mentoring. We should be telling our junior programmers, get off Stack Overflow. But I had one colleague who actually had blacklisted Stack Overflow on his computer. You can go into Chrome and blacklist it, because he had that habit of just mindlessly going to stackoverflow.com, and he wanted to stop himself, so he blacklisted it, so that every time he tried to go to it, he stopped, just the way that people do today with Facebook and BBC News or whatever website you browse to. He did that with Stack Overflow. And we get it in our IDEs as well. Things like IntelliJ, they make it really easy to just kind of hit Alt-Enter and it completes the next word for you. So you see a lot of junior programmers will just be writing nonsense Java because their IDE tells them what it thinks they should write. So we get into this IDE hell. And so this is maybe the crux of what mentoring is to me. There are a lot of these ideas which are just untouchable. We don't even think about fixing these things in our communities. But that's what mentoring is about. It's about looking at people's habits and saying, okay, well, maybe this thing that you do, there's a better way to do it. So this is meant to be reinventing the wheel, which is, the fact I had to explain it tells how bad it is. Yeah, that's a common thing we see in our industry, right? I look at a lot of the open source tools that come out of big companies, I'm not going to name any, but they just tend to be reinventions of the same idea. And I think that's another issue that we see in today's world. A lot of people just aren't aware of what's out there. They aren't aware of their history, they aren't aware of other approaches to problems that might be useful. We also have things like imposter syndrome, where juniors come in and they feel like they don't belong. And again, that comes down to the fact that we work alone. We present our egos to people. So people join our teams and think, oh, I can't possibly be this good. But actually, they're just as good. There are probably things that they're better at than the other people on the team, and they've just joined. But we don't display ourselves in that way. We set our teams up in this kind of hierarchy. And so imposter syndrome is a symptom of that. We've got burnout, hostility, anger, aggression, things that occur in the workplace all of the time. And not necessarily healthy things for the workplace. We're probably all familiar with the term of death march, which is a project which is just bound to die and never complete. it's still a common thing in our industry. And the fact that that happens and we don't stop to think, well, why is this happening? Can we not stop this happening? So I'm not going to claim that mentoring can solve all of that, but I do think we can improve on it, and that's what I'm going to look at in the talk. So let's start with what is a mentor. You're going to see a lot of wizards in my talk, so I think of Gandalf and Dumbledore, great examples of mentors. There were people who were there when they were needed. They weren't, hand-holding, and there was a little bit of mystery about them. And the people who they were mentoring looked up to them. They had a kind of skill set that the mentee was after. And there's a whole load of other terms that we use. So we got manager, team lead, coach, teacher. So what's the relationship? What do I actually mean by mentor? And why is it different from those? Well, we look at team lead and manager. They're people who are actually setting your work. And I think with a mentor, there's no responsibility for work there. You're helping somebody on what they want help with. There's no involvement. So I think for a lot of companies, they set up mentoring programs, and the mentor turns out to be the same person who is leading the team, or is their manager, or is somewhere in that hierarchy. And that can work, but it's not a traditional mentor, and I'll come back to that. The thing about it is that they're going to put their interests first. With a mentor, you need to be putting your mentees' interests first. And that's impossible if you have this hierarchy relationship. Teaching's done to a syllabus. There's a specific goal, and the teacher cares about whether you're successful at that goal or not. So that means if you're working to a syllabus, you're going to teach in a very specific way. We know about that with exams. You're not actually teaching people to learn or have knowledge. You're teaching them to pass an exam. So mentorship is a recognition of that. It's trying to say, okay, we want you to learn skills and gain knowledge. We don't care about exams. Coaching is like mentoring. You're not responsible for the person who's there, but a coach often does have a specific goal, and they generally won't give advice like a mentor would. When you mentor somebody, you're specifically saying to them, "I'm going to give you advice," and the mentee's saying, "I would like your advice." So there's that dynamic that isn't present with the other relationships. One of the easiest ways to pick up these skills is to practice it. So I don't want you to think that to be a mentor you have to have all these skills in place. No, you just need to find a mentee and start practicing. And how might you do that? Well, a great place to find mentees and also mentors is meetups. You might have a workplace scheme. It can actually start with a very simple question. So you might just go up to someone and say, well, may I give you some advice? So look, people don't always want to get advice, but if they say yes, then that's the start of a mentoring relationship. And one thing you need to be careful about is aligning on values. So let's say you're at a meetup and you're getting to know someone. You probably want to understand if you have common values. The things you care about are aligned. That's going to set you in a really good position to be their mentor. If those things aren't aligned, then already your mentoring relationship is going to be off to a rocky start. So if you think about workplace schemes that set up mentoring, if it's just random assignment, that's probably not going to work out great for everybody involved. Some people, yes, it will work out, but other people, no. So it's great to actually know who you're working with. From the mentee side, they've got to have a lot of respect for the mentor. So if you've got a mentor, you want to respect their time. You want to turn up on time for your meetings. You want to do what you've promised to do. So yeah, we'll get into that. I mean, I think in terms of finding a mentor, I can do a live demo right now. So as you can tell, my drawing skills are pretty atrocious. If there's anybody here who knows how to draw well, I would love a mentor on how to draw, so that my next talk, which will be a technical talk, I'll be able to draw better diagrams. So yeah, speak to me afterwards if you know how to draw. So let's look at the boring stuff. Actually what technical skills are before we get into the more interesting stuff. So first of all, we got project work. If it's your workplace mentoring scheme, that might be actually your work that you're assigned by your team, by your boss, or your tech lead. If it's something outside of work, it might be a side project. So side projects are a great way to learn. Not everybody is best suited for a side project. So you shouldn't, if you're trying to mentor someone, you shouldn't push them to do side projects. But some people love to do them. And the kind of side project that is often really great to see is a side project which solves somebody else's problem. So something small maybe to start with. Maybe also pick a language, a programming language that they're not familiar with. For example, if they already know an object-oriented language, you might challenge them to learn a functional language. There's a whole array of different languages. One I love is historical languages. You can also do new languages, so languages which are probably a bit rubbish at the moment, but will be better later if you get involved. So like loads of fun ways to bring learning into a side project. And yeah, so you don't even need to be familiar with the language that you're teaching. The key about mentoring is that a lot of your skills are transferable. You don't need to know a specific language in order to mentor that. Yeah, it's definitely worth practicing even if you don't know that language. Second thing is planning, and there's two parts to this. First one is longer term planning. You really need to set a plan. So plans are there to change. If you set a plan, you don't need to do everything exactly as it says, but it gives people, it gives you, the mentor and the mentee, an idea of what you're trying to achieve. So it's a way to communicate those ideas. What do they want to get out of the relationship, and what do you want to get out of it? When I've planned things before, sometimes I've used spreadsheets, sometimes it's just checklists. So a spreadsheet might say, okay, here's the things we want to achieve, and here's the dates we want to achieve them by, and whether we've done them or not. And so it's just a spreadsheet. We can adjust it whenever we want, but it's the idea that we're communicating to each other, okay, here's what we expect to get out of this. This is what we're aiming towards. Without a plan, you don't really have anywhere that you're going. So it's an example of over-communication as well. It might feel like it's a lot of work to write out a spreadsheet, but it's super critical to the success of a project, particularly if you've got a specific time in which to do the mentoring. So let's say it's a year-long mentoring program. Planning out what you're going to do in that year is critical. Otherwise, yeah, you'll get nowhere. So the second type of planning then is iteration planning. The cornerstone of any mentoring scheme is a regular meeting that you're going to have with your mentee. So it might be once a week, it might be once every 2 weeks, similar to the way you would deliver software. So the mentee would come in and demo what they've done, and maybe it was some reading, maybe it was a side project, and then you'd plan what would be in the next week. And that includes estimation. A lot of people in the industry think estimation's hard and we shouldn't do it because it's always wrong. Mentoring environments are a really great place to actually practice estimation. If you've got a side project, telling somebody how you're going to estimate it and when you think you're going to deliver things by is a really good way to learn. And I would definitely recommend it in the mentoring relationship. So let's look at, let's go back. Reading. So reading's important. Always have a reading list in your head. As a kind of senior engineer, you've probably read loads of books that are related to your career. So keep them in your head and know that recommending a book to somebody is a great way to teach them without having to teach them. And they can read it if they want, and maybe it'll be a total boring book to them and they won't finish it, that's fine. But having that list there is important. On the other side of that, on the flip side, you can read too much. We are in a creative industry. Writing code is a creative thing. The best way to learn is to just get to writing code. Yeah, actually one of the things I did to prepare for this talk was I got rid of a load of old books that I had on my bookshelf. And I don't want to say the names of the books, but they were great books for me at the time, the kind of books that teach you how to follow rules in software. So, for example, I had a Java book which told me every class I should have an equals method and a get hash code method. And if you've ever seen any Java code, you'll know that this is responsible for a lot of horrible code in code bases. I'm going to come back to that point. But yeah, so getting rid of books as well, knowing that books aren't helpful to you at that point in your career, and they might be useful to somebody else. So I try to give away books all the time. Let's go on to discipline. Okay, I think this is a chance to give away this book, this amazing book. It's got a foreword by Bill Gates, by the way. Anybody want to give me a definition of discipline? Yeah?
Doing what needs to be done, even
Okay. Yeah. I think at some point you're going to start loving it, though. So yeah. Anybody else want to try? Yeah.
Yeah, doing something that you identify as important when it is easy, but also when it is hard to do that.
Okay. I'm going to go with the first definition. If you want to come and claim your prize at the end, I think you're right. Like we to that point, yes. A lot of what we consider discipline is stuff people don't do because we consider it hard, and actually they're very simple things. So refactoring is the big example. Teaching people how to refactor well, people don't leave time for it. I mentioned my mentor at the start who talked about who told me about how to go slow. Refactoring is a big thing. Sitting back and looking at the code you've written and thinking, is this the cleanest it can be? I know when I started out, that was not my inclination. I didn't think, right, I need to make clean code. I was just racing away, trying to get as many lines written, wanted to prove I was the best programmer. And so refactoring is the opposite of that. It's sitting back and saying, okay, no, my code, the first code I write is going to be terrible, but I can improve on it if I just sit with it and look at it for a bit. So yeah, discipline is kind of daily habits as well. It's the things that we take every day to improve our quality of work. I mentioned Stack Overflow earlier. That's another one. Do you go to Stack Overflow or do you prefer to go to primary source documentation? So let's say you're reading up on, I don't know, MySQL or something. Do you Stack Overflow it or do you go to the MySQL documentation and figure that out? That's another discipline. TDD. Another great example of discipline. And actually a great example of where a mentor is super useful because TDD is often done terribly. I used to be a terrible TDD, or I was a C# programmer. I worked at a bank and I was trying to do TDD. I'd read about it online, but I hadn't read any books about it because the books on TDD were all about Java. So I thought, well, they're not for me, so I'm just going to have to figure this out myself. And then eventually, I found someone who really knew TDD. They had been doing it for years and years. They'd worked with the people who invented it. And they recommended a load of books. They showed me how to do it. And it was the mentorship which kind of upped my skill level with TDD. And it's a disciplined approach to writing software. So again, that's the kind of thing that if you don't know how to do it, then find somebody who does, because it's so hard to get that from books. So the thing about reviewing code is, I'd say reviewing code is the thing I see done badly most of the time. Pull requests. I mean, I would love to invent a tool to do code reviews where you've just got one tweet to review the code. That's all you can say about the code. Because I see these pull requests and they have 50 comments on them. It's normal to kind of pick apart every change in a pull request. And that might be okay if you're, say, a team lead, but for a mentor should be interested in something deeper, something more about your values as a programmer. What do you care about in the code base? So when I review code through pull requests, I'll tend to only leave a maximum of 3 comments. And if I have more comments, I'll prioritize them and leave the top 3 comments. Because I'm trying to shape somebody's direction in which they think to write code. I don't want to review all their pull requests in future and have the same issues. I want them to change the way they're thinking about the code they write, so that ultimately I don't have to review their pull requests, because I trust the quality of their code. That being said, that's Dogma. That's my own personal dogma. So there's a whole lot of things that we do in our careers that we're just taking because other people told us to do that. I mentioned the example earlier. I read a Java book and it told me I should always write an equals method and a get hash code method for my classes, and that's Dogma. I actually, so one of my favorite ones is comments. My dogma is I don't write comments. You say, there's a saying, never say never. Well, for me, comments, I always say never to comments, because I just think any comment in your code it's a code smell. It's telling you that the code isn't clear enough. You have to write a comment to explain it, so you can make the code cleaner. But that's my own personal dogma, as I said. And as a mentor, you got to be careful not to inflict that on your mentee. You got to let them explore their own style. So I might like TDD and short methods and blah, 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 but that's my style, and it took me years to develop. I don't think it's so helpful when people tell you what their style is, because it takes away the fun and the creativity from programming. So as a mentor, your job isn't necessarily to tell people specifically, okay, don't write comments. It's to influence them in a more subtle way. Another example of that is the goto keyword. And Dijkstra famously wrote about it decades ago, about goto considered harmful. And I think it was a few years ago, Linus Torvalds wrote an email and said, why do we believe that goto is bad? It's perfectly valid keyword, and it can be used to great effect. But it's a dogma. We, as an industry, think, oh, I'll never write a goto because it's terrible. And I'm not telling you to go out and start writing gotos everywhere, but it's something that you should always challenge. And as a mentor, your job, again, is to introduce the fact that it's dogma to your mentee. So as a contractor, I actually have to do tech tests from time to time. And I did a tech test a couple of weeks ago, and it was a JavaScript project, and I actually failed it. And I've been writing JavaScript for ages. And the comment I got back was, not enough classes. And I mean, so I wasn't too upset because I knew what they meant. I mean, I'm a functional JavaScript programmer. I try not to write classes where possible. And so I knew what they meant. But it's interesting that somebody who was judging others for hiring let their dogma get in the way of that decision. And I think it could have been better approached with a question. They could have come to me and said, oh, well, why did you write your code like this? But instead, they just kind of applied their dogma. And that's, a lot of people get stuck at that level. That's the Dunning-Kruger effect. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's the idea that people mistake their ability for greater than it is. There's a lot of rules that we have in our society, but rules are made to be broken. So you learn the rules, like write the equals method and get hash code method, but then you forget the rules. You learn to break them where appropriate. And so you got to get past that hump. And again, that's a key secret of mentoring. You want to make sure people are starting to think for themselves. They're not just following blindly what other people have told them to do. Another thing I see a lot of with my clients is people are 100% busy. The best programmers have a full plate of work, and they don't give time to junior people. And it's a very easy trap to fall into, because if let's say your team has a specific velocity to hit every week, you don't want to decrease that velocity. And you get a junior person on your team, and all of a sudden you think, oh, well, if they take this task, it's going to take them 3 times longer than it's going to take me, so I'll just do it. And you end up with this situation where you don't give anybody any work. And the junior person on your team doesn't get any training, and they don't get any experience. So with mentorship, the best way you can really mentor someone is to sit with them and work with them, teach them how you write code. And you see, the best teams do this. So the best teams will be pairing all of the time, or the team leads will be working with the juniors. They won't be writing code themselves, even though they know they could probably, write the story in a quarter of the time of the rest of the team, whatever the number is. That's not their priority. Their priority is to make the entire team successful. And this is particularly important if you're a team lead and you want to be a better mentor. You want to try to get to this approach where you're not actually writing code. I mentioned imposter syndrome earlier. This is a key reason why we have imposter syndrome, because we don't spend time sitting with our junior programmers saying, hey, you can do this stuff as well. And they think there's a huge gulf between what they're doing and what you're doing. And in reality, there's not. And just sitting and working with them for a few days would show them that. So yeah, again, this is a big idea of the software craft movement, which is based on the medieval craftsman guilds. And master craftsmen would work with our apprentices all of the time, teaching the apprentices how to do things by doing them with them. So yeah, let's talk about the management idea then. The issue with being a manager is that you're responsible for the work, and that means there's no space to fail or have error in what you're doing. There's no place to have fun. You've got a very specific goal and you've got to hit it. So as a mentee, you're not going to feel the safety of saying, well, I'm able to explore and it's okay if I screw up. So psychological safety is very important in that point. Where as a mentor, if you've got a mentor-mentee relationship, it should be one of trust, where the mentee feels like you're going to allow me to experiment. You're going to show me things that I'm going to get wrong. You know, let's say it's a functional language, so you've never written any functional code, and you're meant to say, okay, I want you to try writing closure. You might really screw up at that. Your code might look terrible. I mean, when is that ever going to happen if you're a manager, if you're trying to be a manager? When are you going to give your team the chance to learn and get better? So it's not to say that a manager can't be a mentor, but if you want to be a good mentor, you need to start getting away from these old management habits that are enforced inside of us. So giving people the chance to experiment or to have their own side projects within work hours. And one of the biggest ideas that I picked up while working at an investment bank was the idea of succession planning. Every manager had to be planning their replacement because people moved on. And to the business that was at risk, there was a risk to the success of the team if the manager left. So they always had to make sure you were training up somebody under you. And for a mentor, that makes sense, right? To go back to the point of you always starting at the bottom, helping the most junior person on the team. If that's your approach, then it fits very well with the management approach. So it is possible to be a manager and work in a way that makes you also a successful mentor. But it's not a very traditional way of managing. Another big mistake I see with mentors is they don't treat their mentees as equals. Never ever forget that you're dealing with mature human beings. Which, again, in our industry, we don't like to think of ourselves as human beings. We like to think of ourselves as machines. We're just there to write code. But we're not. It's not even about adults. If you're old enough to type, you can be treated with respect for writing code. So you never assume your superiority as a mentor, especially when the people you're mentoring have a whole different set of life skills to you. I work at a boot camp at the moment, and the people coming in have incredible careers. They've done incredible things with their lives. All I've done is sit in front of my computer writing code. So, what right have I to tell them that I'm better than them in any sense? Yes, I have a skill that I'm there to mentor them with, but that's the extent of it. So I think it's very important when you're mentoring that you remember that and don't treat your mentees like their children. Humbleness is the mark of a great mentor, I would say. It's the thing which really sets you apart. If you can treat somebody like, your neighbor or not somebody you're working with. For some reason, we've invented this idea in the workplace that it's okay to believe people are inferior. That's why we get a lot of anger. People get angry at the people who are under them. We should be treating each other with respect all the time. I mentioned earlier the code review I did, the tech test, where the feedback I got was not enough classes. It would have been great if I just had a conversation with that person and they asked me, oh, well, why did you write the code like this? But for them, it was simple enough to just say, oh, it's not right. They didn't want to have a conversation with me on a human level. There's something here about authenticity as well, bringing your authentic self to the workplace. Sometimes I've seen definitions of professionalism which talk about the need to leave yourself behind at home. The workplace is not a place for your personality or who you are. No, actually professionalism is about bringing everything about yourself to the workplace, knowing who each other is, getting to know people, bonding with them, having a trust with them. Knowing that a mentor is imperfect, you definitely don't want to present yourself as a mentor as somebody who's just infallible. Of course you're imperfect. So letting go of the ego is super critical to this kind of equals idea. And another thing, I suppose, is detachment. You don't want to be detached from your mentee. You want to be completely involved in what they're doing. You want to be getting into every area of their work, exploring it, helping them explore it in their own minds. And it should be a fun thing. So professionalism, I think, is kind of interest and open and authenticity. It's also kindness and fun. So yeah, it shouldn't be a serious relationship. Yeah, so that kind of comes on to listening. I'm sure you're all familiar with the term rubber ducking, right? So rubber ducking is, oh, hey, I'm far too busy to listen to you right now, so go and talk to that inanimate thing, and eventually you'll figure it out. And that's what rubber ducking is, right? Well, no, okay, so it's not. You know, there's a valid technique in there that is, if you just figure out how to talk to yourself about something, you can solve the problem yourself. But again, it's a symptom of the problem we see, that people want to work alone. They're busy all the time. They don't want to be interrupted. So rubber ducking is something that should be a fallback technique. And we have a culture of do not disturb. And it's an interesting culture because it means we have all let our listening muscles lapse, right? They've wasted away. We don't know how to listen to each other because we spend all of our time working alone. But unfortunately, as a mentor, you have to start exercising that skill. There was certainly a time in my career that I couldn't speak to people. I was an awful communicator. And it was only just getting practice at that improved. People think that programmers, again, like the Hollywood stereotype, we don't know how to deal with each other. A lot of the time, that's not exactly true. It's just something that we need to practice and understand how to communicate with different types of people. So here's a simple experiment, actually, you can try. Have you ever told anybody, oh, just Google it? I mean, I've definitely said it. This is something, it's one of my pet peeves. So next time there's something that you want to know that you feel you could Google, instead of Googling it, think about somebody in the workplace who would know the answer to it, and go up to them and ask them. Just say, hey, can you tell me blah blah blah? Let's say it's get hash code method. Go up to them and say, hey, can you tell me how the get hash code method works? And you'll either get two responses. One will be just Google it, or the other will be they'll actually tell you the answer. And it's bizarre to me that it's okay to not answer a question. We've developed this culture where you get asked a question and then you just don't bother answering it, you shut it down. I mean, we've forgotten what communication is. So yeah, I mean, that's a really effective technique for learning how to question. Effective questioning is something you got to learn as a mentor. So just start out with that one and see how far you get. Okay, and then listening itself, I suppose there's a process to it. So first of all, when you're listening, you got to put aside any emotions or anything you're currently dealing with. You've got to really clear your brain of all of your own baggage that you've got in your head at that moment. There's certainly times when it's probably not appropriate to try to be listening to someone who's talking to you. Times of crisis, that can be a very difficult one to actively listen. And make sure you're upfront about those kind of moments in your life. But if you're going to listen to somebody well, you need to have a clear mind and be focused on what they're going to say. And so second, you got to empathize with them. Hear the words, feel the feels. You've got to really try to experience what they're getting across to you. And often that's about what isn't being said as much as what is being said. So the third step then, retell what you just heard in different words. Then that's got two effects. One, if you've misunderstood, they'll tell you. And two, it can help whoever you're speaking to organize their own thoughts on that topic. So just the fact of re-saying what they've said in different words can organize something in their brain and help them see a solution without you having to suggest anything. And then the fourth thing is, I suppose, you just repeat that process. So everything you're listening to when your mentee is talking to you, you listen well and you repeat it back. So there's no fifth step if you're just listening. If somebody hasn't asked for advice, you just stop there. Now, if you're in a mentee relationship, you're very fortunate in that that person is expecting your advice. So the fifth step is then to figure out what advice that should be. And often the way to do that is think about all the things I've said and formulate one piece of advice that might apply across all of them. So it might be a book recommendation, for example, or something they can do in their code or in their workplace, or a conversation they might have. So all those kind of things are the suggestions I make all the time to the people I'm mentoring. Let's give an example of that. Let's say my mentee came to me and said, "Oh, I've got this story I'm working on. It's taken me weeks so far. I feel like I'm out of my depth. I've been using the debugger a lot. I don't know if I'm really going to get it finished. I'm considering scrapping it." I might say back to them, "Okay, let me see if I'm understanding you. You're struggling with a big piece of work. You've implemented most of it, but it's been an uphill climb, and you're not sure if you've chosen the right approach." So I think it's the same message, but I delivered it in a different way, with different words. And it might help them understand what's been said. So finally on this, I kind of want to mention briefly about caregiving. There's this idea that some people in life are caregivers. And I would say, as I said, I wasn't the best listener before. I certainly wasn't a caregiver. And now I would certainly classify myself as a caregiver. And that can take a lot of energy, listening to people and being there to support them. It's something that, can get very sort of weighty. So it's important to take time for yourself. You're not a therapist. You might be, but I think you're probably all coders. So, remember you're not a therapist. You're not there to, you don't really know how, you probably don't have all the tools available to you to be a successful therapist. And listening can often kind of broach that. So just make sure you're completely aware of yourself. Feedback, so, feedback's important. You want to, there's a fine line between honesty and cruelty. That's the big message there. So certainly get practice at giving feedback. I don't know what this picture's about, actually. Oh, yeah, I do know what this is about. So anonymous feedback forms are immensely useful. In fact, there's one for my talk, so I'd encourage you to fill it out. And they've actually added a question for me, which is, can you rate my drawing skills on a scale of terrible to awful? Okay, so so mentoring network. So mentoring is often about sharing these experiences. So the aim we're trying to get to is mentors who can mentor, people build on what they've learned and teach that to other people. And there's some, when you've got a network of people who understand what it's like to help people, then you can be an advocate for your mentees. So often your mentees can benefit from your help in getting jobs. Maybe you can help with conversations with their managers. So being an advocate is a big part of it. It's important that we share our stories at places like this. I assume you all love networking. That's why you're here at a conference. So this is a perfect place to share those stories. Mentoring's viral, right? So as soon as you're a mentor, you want to tell other people about how amazing mentoring is. So let's move to the future. So this is 24th century Star Trek. This is the kind of perfect world that if we were all mentoring, what would it look like? What would the industry look like? They're mob programming, of course. They're all standing up because sitting is the new smoking. If you didn't know already, so nobody sits anymore. You can see they're doing TDD there. If you look closely, you can see they're also using Vim. That's survived the 24th century. No word about Emacs. The future for me, it's a much stronger community. The skills gap that we see today, where juniors join organizations and they don't have the right skills. There's kind of chronic underemployment at the moment in the IT industry. the grads that come out of ComSci schemes just don't have the right skills. That would be solved, and mentoring is a big way to get there. We'd have many, many more successful projects that are delivered on time, on budget, because people would be working together to solve any issues that come up. So all the, those kind of stories that people get stuck on, imposter syndrome, burnout, they just wouldn't happen because we wouldn't let them happen. We'd be there for each other. And of course, we'd have satisfied teams that have long shelf lives. And maybe I've certainly worked on teams which have burned out and the best people have left. So hopefully in the future, if we solve that issue, then we'll all have long, happy careers. So yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. I've just started a mailing list, so if you want tips on how to mentor, then please go there. I think you can just scan in that QR code somehow. I don't know how to do that, if anybody wants to mentor me on that. But yeah, that should take you to the same URL. Yeah, please sign up. I'm going to send out weekly tips. And yeah, also get in contact if you've got any thoughts. I would love to hear them. And yeah, do fill out that feedback form. Thank you very much. I guess I've got time for a question, maybe, if anybody's got it. Yeah.
Then in a professional environment where senior people get thrown into mentor junior guys, in your experience, do you think it's better to just create a side project for them and mentor them within that environment, then mentoring them in a real life client project, the pressures of a client project versus the side project, but at the same time,
Yep.
level of accountability and ownership because it's kind of a side project?
Yeah. So the question is it better to mentor them on their actual work or on a side project? I think if you can give them the time to have a side project, 20% time, then do that because it's so fantastically useful for people. And make sure it's deliberate practice. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, if you're a mentor, how many mentees do you recommend you have at a time? Is there like a limit, or do you recommend like a one-to-one type relationship?
So the question is there a limit to how many you can have? I would say no. If you feel like you're putting too much energy into your mentee, then you're putting too much energy into your mentee. It shouldn't, as a mentor, it should be a very easy thing. Like an hour a week might be all you need. Yeah, thanks. Cool, thanks very much.